Hello, and welcome to the session Innovating for Global Success, a client-partner perspective on product development. I'm Emily, an editor at Quarks. Before we get started today, let's quickly go over the ways you can participate in the discussion. You can use the chat tab to interact with other attendees during the session, and you can use the Q&A tab to submit questions for the presenters. Our session is brought to you by FlavorWiki. Enjoy the presentation.
Welcome, and thank you for joining this FlavorWiki presentation with Quarks. To begin, let me briefly introduce myself and some of the team members who play an important role in our work. My name is Brijder, and I serve as Head of Client Operations at FlavorWiki. I'll be guiding you through today's session. Before joining FlavorWiki, I worked at Amazon, and today I focus on building strong relationships with our customers and clients worldwide. FlavorWiki itself was founded in 2017 by our CEO Daniel Protz. What began as a one-person company has since grown into a global team of more than 45 experts. Together, we support a diverse customer base across industries and geographies. We're also fortunate to be guided by leaders with decades of experience in sensory and consumer science. For example, Marcia Young, our advisor, previously served as Global Head of Consumer Science at Mondelez International, and before that at Kraft and Cadbury. Her expertise in sensory and insights is a tremendous resource for us. Alongside Marcia, we have Ellie Alexandraki, our Head of Sensory and Consumer Science. With a background from Wageningen University, Ellie leads all of our consumer and sensory projects, ensuring the research is both rigorous and actionable. Now that you've met some of the team, let's take a quick look at what we'll cover today. First, I'll give you a short introduction to FlavorWiki and the work we do. Second, I'll walk you through a case study with CJ. And third, we'll see a discussion between Daniel Protz and YiXin from CJ, where they'll share their perspectives on the collaboration and key learnings from the project. So, what exactly do we do at FlavorWiki? The challenge most consumer goods companies face is that their innovation process is too siloed. R&D spends months perfecting a formula in the lab, only to hand it off to marketing for consumer testing, often too late, too slowly, and at great cost. And even then, there's no guarantee that the perfected product will actually connect with consumers. FlavorWiki solves this problem by bridging that gap between R&D and marketing. We provide a highly scalable, global, and controlled method to integrate sensory data and real consumer insights earlier in the innovation cycle, helping brands develop products that not only perform well in the lab, but also succeed in the real world. Our proprietary panel of over 2 million participants allows us to operate in more than 50 countries speaking over 40 languages. This global reach enables us to run projects at scale while maintaining a standardized and highly effective methodology, ensuring consistent, high-quality insights for multinational brands. Our core focus is sensory and product experience research. Using our patented consumer profiling methodology, we help companies identify what consumers truly like about their products and how those products can be optimized. That could mean taste, texture, or aroma, but also external factors like packaging, pricing, sustainability, or even the shopping experience itself. We then combine all of these insights into robust statistical models that reveal what really drives consumer preference and purchase intent. Most of our projects are designed around the full consumer journey. This experience begins the moment we direct panelists to purchase a product, whether in-store or online. They capture short videos and photos and share impressions of the shopping and unboxing experience. Then, as they consume the product, they answer guided questions about taste, texture, aroma, and overall appeal. This approach allows us to create a complete product experience map, connecting the purchase moment with the sensory experience. Our studies are conducted in context, meaning participants interact with products naturally in their own environment and in their own way. This gives us authentic insights into how people really use products, what they enjoy, and where potential friction points may exist. In addition, we can ship product samples worldwide. This is particularly valuable for prototype testing, new formulations, or ingredient changes. In every country where we operate, we partner with trusted local suppliers who blind and distribute samples to our panel. Because we work with only our own verified community, we know exactly who is participating and can validate every result with confidence. Beyond sensory testing, we also support qualitative studies, concept tests, in-home evaluations, and even central location tests. But our real strength lies in capturing the entire consumer journey, from purchase to unboxing to consumption and ultimately to disposal. That's a brief introduction to FlavorWiki and how we can help companies better understand their consumers. Next, let's take a closer look at the CJ case study and see how these methods come to life in practice. Let's explore how FlavorWiki guided CJ, one of Korea's leading food producers, through the development and launch of their wellness shots, a fermented probiotic drink. This case study is more than a product story. It's about how careful testing, consumer insight, and iterative optimization can turn a bold idea into a successful product across very different markets. The launch was a strong success. In fact, CJ highlighted it in their 2022 sustainability report as a benchmark for open innovation, a rare distinction for product development projects. Our work centered on 5 critical dimensions. We began by assessing awareness. Next, we measured acceptance of CJ's wellness shots concept. We then explored usage behaviors. Optimization followed, where we refined product features, positioning, and communication to maximize impact. And finally, we studied adoption, identifying what drives repeat purchases and long-term loyalty. Together, these dimensions created a structured framework for reducing uncertainty and supporting sustainable market success. Each stage built the foundation for the next, ensuring every insight was tested, validated, and put into action. We began with fast digital in-app surveys. Consumers could view product concepts directly within the FlavorWiki platform and respond instantly. This method allowed CJ to gather structured real-time feedback in days instead of weeks, accelerating decision-making. By identifying what resonated and what didn't, the team could prioritize the most impactful improvements early in the process. This efficiency was key to maintaining momentum and aligning cross-functional teams around clear data-backed decisions. Next, we layered in qualitative focus groups. These sessions allowed consumers to share motivations, concerns, and emotional reactions in their own words. For CJ, this added valuable depth behind the quantitative data, uncovering subtle factors that influence purchase decisions, perceived credibility, and emotional connection. This blend of quantitative precision and qualitative depth created a 360-degree understanding of how people perceive and relate to wellness beverages. In Korea, the launch followed a carefully staged, evidence-based process. We began with digital surveys to measure initial appeal, then ran focus groups where participants tasted 4 prototypes. Finally, products were placed in coffee kiosks to observe purchase behavior in real life. Each stage built onto the previous one, forming a continuous loop of testing and optimization. This disciplined approach ensured that every adjustment, whether flavor, claim, or packaging, was grounded in genuine consumer feedback. For the US, we adapted the methodology to fit local expectations and market dynamics. Central location testing provided controlled environments for evaluating flavor, texture, and packaging design. This was followed by in-home trials, which captured authentic usage behaviors after market entry. The two-pronged approach ensured that the final product aligned with American tastes, communication preferences, and lifestyle habits, without losing the essence of its Korean wellness roots. CJ's journey unfolded in 5 clear steps, moving from early prototypes to full in-store validation. This iterative structure enabled rapid refinement while keeping every decision anchored in real consumer evidence. By organizing the project in this way, we minimized uncertainty at each stage, transforming subjective opinion into measurable progress. It also gave CJ's internal teams visibility into how each insight informed the next round of development, strengthening collaboration between R&D, marketing, and strategy functions. In Korea, focus groups were pivotal in refining the liquid prototype. 70% of consumers found probiotic shots appealing, with preferences split between immune boost and gut shot varieties. Top purchase drivers were clear: health functionality, price, and nutritional value. These insights directly informed how CJ framed the product's local positioning, emphasizing practical health benefits and affordability, 2 key motivators in this market. It also validated that probiotics had moved from niche interest to mainstream health relevance in Korean consumers' daily routines. Next, visual concepts were tested through digital surveys. Results revealed which packaging designs, product names, and on-pack claims generated the strongest first impressions. This step ensured that the final design would attract attention on the shelf while clearly communicating value and benefit. By integrating visual testing early, CJ avoided costly redesigns later in development and ensured brand consistency across multiple SKUs. Prototypes were then introduced into coffee kiosks for live feedback. By observing real-world purchase behavior, CJ confirmed that price and health benefits were the dominant decision drivers. This validation step bridged the gap between consumer intention and action, reinforcing the importance of affordability paired with functional credibility. It also highlighted how even subtle pricing adjustments could shift perception and sales performance in the competitive beverage category. For the US, the same product required a different approach. Visuals and messaging were refined to highlight modern wellness and convenience, ultimately branding the line as probiotic shots, a contemporary expression of traditional Korean health concepts. Each 2-ounce shot combined cold pressed juices with scientifically proven probiotics designed to survive stomach acid and support gut and skin health. This repositioning aligned with US consumers' preference for clean label functional beverages. A US prototype was tested in Los Angeles through central location testing. Here, consumers evaluated taste, aroma, and mouthfeel, providing CJ with the data needed to fine-tune sensory performance before launch. This sensory validation ensured that the final product not only met flavor expectations, but also delivered a satisfying premium drinking experience. The testing also confirmed which flavor pairings, such as ginger or citrus blends, resonated most strongly among wellness-oriented consumers. The final validation stage was competitive in-store testing. By measuring actual purchase behavior against key competitors, we confirmed that all previous optimizations translated into tangible sales performance. This step bridged research and commercial execution, ensuring that insights truly delivered market impact. The results exceeded expectations. Over 29,000 shots were sold in the first 12 weeks. From concept to launch, the full journey took just 9 months, much faster than standard beverage development cycles. Even more importantly, the project was recognized publicly as a model of consumer-driven innovation, showcasing how a lean, insight-based process can achieve both speed and precision. This case highlights FlavorWiki's end-to-end capabilities, from early-stage concept testing to prototype validation and market-specific insights. Our methodology supports every step of product development. Each layer of testing builds confidence, enabling teams to make faster, smarter decisions that directly impact launch success. Our proprietary paired question methodology reduces response bias and pinpoints true drivers of preference. Combined with our digital platform, it enables rapid, globally scalable fieldwork in over 50 countries. Real-time dashboards integrate sensory, concept, and usage data into one clear view, helping teams stay aligned, efficient, and consumer-focused. CJ's team accessed all results instantly through these dashboards, with exportable visualizations ready for immediate decision-making. This transparency allowed marketing, R&D, and strategy teams to stay synchronized, maintaining both speed and rigor throughout the 9-month development cycle. The evidence of product-market fit was undeniable. Repeat purchases, strong sellout rates, and a rising willingness to pay confirmed that the product delivered meaningful value to consumers. Tailored packaging and messaging for each region ensured communication stayed relevant and effective. To conclude, whether launching a beverage, snack, or functional food, FlavorWiki provides the end-to-end testing and consumer intelligence that brands need to succeed.
So YiXin, thank you very much for taking the time to be here today and discuss this case. The case was obviously gone through by the narrator, but I wanted to ask, just in your own words, what were the objectives that CJ had in this research that you did together with us?
Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here and happy to speak about the case. When we first started to look at probiotic beverages in the market, we really wanted to bring a new angle, a new concept, but both to Korea and to the US. And we really wanted to know what could be very different about bringing the same product to different markets. How would we tweak it in order for us to bring value to consumers in these different markets? So coming to FlavorWiki was really with this idea that we needed to know the consumers better. We needed to know what sort of product we needed to bring and how we could then make sure that the value is communicated to each market. Yeah.
Okay. And this was a really, very, I would call it a multi-step approach project. I recall that I was even had the chance to be in Korea during part of it and understand really the location-specific nature of it. Was there anything about the specific case and sort of the execution that had to happen both in Korea and then in the US and other things that made it kind of a unique need that you had either with us or in general for the research? Because we found it very interesting because we were working with both Korean consumers and US consumers at the same time. And it took over, I think, over a year to do the whole piece. But were there any sort of special considerations you had in that regard?
Yes, I think the fun thing about this project eventually was that the category is new to CJ. We don't know probiotic beverages. So being able to start from a blank slate also allowed us a lot more flexibility to decide how to bring it to market or what sort of product would be best, because there are no legacy, right? There's no legacy, and therefore there is no need for us to lock ourselves into any specific format or specific flavors or specific concept. We were flexible enough to adapt ourselves to the market, but we knew the value that we wanted to bring, or at least the list of value propositions that we could bring, and then we wanted to use that to bring to market. So that gave us a very nice starting point. it allowed us to test it with FlavorWiki with a lot more flexibility. It also gave us a bit more urgency because if we wanted to change a recipe, if we wanted to modify something, we really needed to take this multi-step approach in order for us to change the process parameters in time for us to bring the product to market, but still had the flexibility to do it. I think that was the fun part eventually. It was very unique because first we had Korea as our starting point, so somewhere that the company was more familiar with. We could start to test, we could start to look at the process, we could start to look at how to run this together with FlavorWiki. And then when we brought it to US, which is a newer market for us, we could then use all our learnings and the ways that we did it in Korea, did it in the US, compared it, timed it in the similar fashion, knowing that because it's so far away from us, that the process could take a different timing, could take a different route. But it was honestly, eventually thinking about the full project and how we brought both products from in Korea and in the US to market, I think everyone in the team learned a lot because not only were we able to do it in Korea in a very new way for the company, but also for the US being able to compare almost directly how the consumers would differ and what sort of products we could adjust it to, what sort of flavor profiles would be preferred, and eventually what value are we truly bringing to each consumer market. So it was a really fun one eventually. Yes.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I think that we run into cases like this with, I would call them companies that are very good understanding of their local market. And obviously, CJ is really well known in Korea. You create a bunch of great Korean products, and I think you have a very healthy market share there. So oftentimes the organizations themselves are sort of in this situation where they understand their consumers so well that it's almost like an afterthought to even do any piece of research. And so I thought it was a very forward-thinking way to look at what you were doing. And maybe we can talk a little bit about just the Korean side of it, is because, we went out into these real life coffee kiosks where the consumer was really sitting. And even that was quite new, I think, not just for CJ, but for just for the Korean consumer. Like, they weren't really that used to doing these types of things in that sort of setting. Can you talk a little bit about how that doing the piece of work in Korea, which is not the target market? I don't think a lot of companies would think to start a research project in a place where where it was not the target market, and where, as we found out, there were probably quite a few differences in the consumers in those two different target markets. So can you talk a little bit about the logic behind that and how it went, and what you learned by doing it first locally and then moving to the US piece?
Yeah, thanks for this question, because indeed, when we first conceived the concept, it was meant for the US. Bringing it to Korea first was an opportunity that would allow for the company as well as the technical team, to unlock a few unknowns first before bringing it to a completely new market. Eventually, having a new technology, having a new product, a new category, bringing it to a new market could be quite challenging for everyone. I think de-risking or feeling a little bit more reassured was one of the reasons why it started in Korea first. And to your point, indeed, we know the consumers, but for a category that is new, we might not know them for this new category. They could be a very different consumer group. So that was, we wanted to make sure that if we were going to when we were going to run it in Korea, it needed to be in a way that would still bring value to the company, regardless of whether we would launch it as a retail product eventually or not. Coffee kiosks were a new channel for CJ. And being able to bring it to a completely new channel allowed CJ to also evaluate if this channel would be possible for the company to continue to test new concepts, to test new products, test new categories, even new brands, potentially with partners, and allowed us to accelerate our learnings quite rapidly. The great thing about coffee kiosks are also that they have very different consumers from your usual supermarket grocery types. So then getting to know and gain more understanding on the motivations, the impulse or the reasons for them to visit a kiosk versus buying bulk in groceries also gave us more insights on who we could target in the future, and how different the perceptions could be because of the way that they purchase a product in a kiosk versus retail. So for us, it did more than test a product and a concept. It also allowed for CJ to evaluate a new channel.
Yeah, that's great. And when you did the work in the kiosks in Korea, knowing that there would be some differences potentially in profile, sustainability or value drivers when we got to the US, which we definitely found there were different need cases, how were you thinking internally in the company about remaining flexible in the product design, so that we could potentially make some changes going to the US. I mean, I remember when we got to the US, there were a couple of prototypes that we were trying to decide between. Inside the US, of course, there needed to be a co-packer. So there was a little bit less flexibility in sort of creating, absolutely new formulations in that environment. But still, there needs to be some flexibility remaining in the decision tree to allow for some of the changes that we might have needed to accommodate the U.S. consumer. So, how internally, from an R&D perspective, as you mentioned before, this is very different for the company as well to do this. How did you think about remaining agile in that kind of R&D process to go to the U.S.?
Yeah, bringing it to the US was indeed a whole new challenge, especially with how difficult it can be to bring a new brand or a new product type. We knew what we were looking for, which was to validate the concept and the technology that we were bringing into the US. Therefore, knowing that we did not embark on starting a completely new brand, starting a completely new product, we started to work with an existing partner, so that the route to market would be more rapid, but also that they would have a clearer idea of consumer preferences to start. So we knew that having experts, having people who are already in market, gave us an advantage on flavor profiles that are known. And then now it's a question of how do we ensure that the value that we're bringing is still part of the product, is still part of what we are offering. With that, we, in the partnership with the company in the US,
the co-packer that you were working with.
I wouldn't call them, because they are also the brand eventually. Okay. They are the brand. They hold the brand, right? And then we basically provided an ingredient to the brand, and then we co-developed. We made sure that the concepts and the validations were all clear and clarified with FlavorWiki surveys and the work that we did together. So on our part, we knew what had to be there, and then everything else was flexible. Because I think what was very clear for us, for CJ, was the value we wanted to bring to a new product. We knew where our differentiation could be. Now it's a matter of how do we bring that differentiation in a product that consumers might not be familiar with or might not have seen it in this category before. Then how do we bring it to market? How do we ensure that we communicate it right without having to educate too much? How do we bring them the value without the value of this new probiotic, without alienating anyone, because it could be challenging to understand, or that the flavor profiles would be difficult. So eventually, we had almost everything flexible except for the probiotic.
Okay, great. And I mean, I know that we did a bunch of work even once it was in stores. The first distribution of the product, we also did some competitive testing at the various locations where it was distributed. And ultimately, the product did quite well as a first launch. Were there any things that you ended up tweaking between the product formulation, meaning like in that first launch, that you learned from kind of really seeing people use it in real life in the store, buy it against the competitor? Because sometimes you just don't know what's going to happen until it actually gets on the shelf and you see whether or not you start having repeat purchase, which in this case did happen, which is great. But were there any sort of last minute tweaks that you ended up seeing or reacting to as in that final part of the research?
Yes, I think the final research was actually kind of critical in how we knew we needed to adjust, not the prototype itself, because eventually the product flavor profile was well accepted. But there was, for example, having had the last part of the research done, we knew that the value was clear, the flavor was great, but it was still, for example, a surprise, because there were parts of the product that just was unexpected to consumers. And even if some consumers regarded it to be positive, we knew that that was potentially going to affect other consumers. Therefore, there were tweaks in the recipe and on the packaging in order for us to, one, communicate what the surprise is, so that at least when they pick it up, it's already perceived to be a specific flavor profile. And then two, we adjusted it so that the flavor profile was potentially less potent, less strong. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, important, I suppose. Yeah, I remember. Okay, great. So is there anything else that you could share just as a final, thought about these cases where a company who is not US or not in the market that they're targeting and trying to internationalize? I mean, the world is internationalizing quickly. I think that a lot of brands like CJ, they see opportunity to grow in some of these big markets, whether it be the US or the UK or Nigeria or other places that are really big growing populations. And a lot of these considerations, I think, are important when it comes to developing a new product or adapting a product to another country. It might be working really well in your home country or in an existing place, but then when you want to go to a different location, there are some considerations to make. And a lot, we do see a lot of cases where the brand doesn't do that research. They just sort of start distributing their product in the new market, and then it doesn't behave as they expected, and they kind of have to then be on the back foot a bit. So is there anything, just as a final or capstone thought, that you could say others could think about in the learnings that you had in really transforming not just a product, but also a company's way of thinking into a new market?
Yes, thank you, Daniel. I mean, this one, what I strongly believe in is that research allows for a greater chance of not being surprised in the market. Being able to know early on what consumers perceive about your brand, your technology, the name that you're putting on pack, the way that you communicate, the size of the font. Those are all not highly challenging tests to run, but could very well inform you of how to position your product when you're in a new country. As we discussed, for Korea, the value proposition was very much on price, and if the benefit was very clearly labeled and visible. But for the US, we needed always credibility. Between the two markets, we found very different perceptions on exactly the same product and what they really ask for, because then eventually your product sits on shelf with others. So in the US, we needed to make sure the credibility was clear. We needed to have more communication around, for example, the CFU in a product. We needed to have more communication around what exactly the benefit is, as compared to Korea, where consumers are pretty pleased with a benefit because in the market there are already many other products that have been able to do so. So there is no learning curve. Whereas for a new market, there is a learning curve. So in order to bring a certain credibility, you might have to adjust the way that you bring your message to market. Yeah. In the very same way, if you bring an existing product that you bring it to a new market, what if the value that you found to be so important in your existing market has no part to play in the new market? Then not doing well could be less of the product portfolio, flavor profile, could be less about the way that the product sits on shelf. It could really just be that consumers didn't see that as a benefit that they would choose next to another product. So yeah, so I think to your point, I really found that this research didn't require large CLTs. They didn't require large cohorts of people to come together to test your product. You could really do very basic or even short, small research just to better inform yourself on what to put on pack. Anyway, if packaging needs to be changed because it's a new market, why not also do this additional research to find out what should be put on pack? So yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's great. And listen, this is so I think it's a great case for us because we're multinational as a company, and we definitely see the opportunity of doing things quickly and effectively, where you can make these key learnings, which can sometimes make a huge difference. I mean, I think that the effort of making a new product and putting a new product out to market, there's so many things that go on, including arranging new suppliers and packers, and that's a huge effort. But then there's that last little bit of really making sure that it's completely tweaked to fit the product market fit of your consumer, that sometimes gets forgotten about because you've already done this huge amount of work. But at the end of the day, the consumer cues on things, as you say, like package, how does it taste, what is the value of the effectiveness of it, and different consumers perceive that differently. But there's different competitor sets as well. I find it really interesting that a product like this was very new to the U.S. market, given how big it is. But as you said, and I also noticed during my visit, that there are a lot of these types of things already in the Korean market, so the consumer knew it, so they could evaluate it maybe a little bit more critically. Whereas the U.S. consumer totally knew, didn't know what to think about it, versus many other categories potentially.
Exactly to your point, companies already invest so much in bringing something to market. The conversations I think that take place the most has always been with buyers, retailers, and that is indeed a big part of bringing a product to market. But for getting consumers is kind of it's one of the ways that could really not allow for how all the efforts to be realized, right? I mean, one thing that we realized about the Korea launch was being able to look at feedback from the coffee kiosk versus the surveys that we ran. There was also a lot to distill from that outcome. So the survey, the research that we did allowed us to also bring two pictures into the same product, two pictures of the same product. And then that allowed us to evaluate if our initial hypotheses were correct or not. And eventually how else we could then, in the next version or in the next launch, how could we adjust our product such that it reaches the right consumers or the consumers that were willing to buy it.
Listen, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate you sharing your experience with us in this case, and wish you all the best. Hope to talk again soon.
Thank you very much. It was a great collaboration with FlavorWiki. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.